Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Monday, June 5th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. And you know when you're starting a podcast and your internet has been shaky for the last half hour, it's kind of like when you're on an airplane and you take off during a thunderstorm. Like this is gonna be it's gonna be bumpy. This might be a rough edit.
This landing.
Let's just see if we can get through this before the internet goes down for the entire afternoon. I can go without internet for pretty much the rest of the day, but I kind of need it to get the show done. So on this episode, we will dig into the upcoming debut of Andrew Abbott as he joins the Reds rotation. We saw Reese Olson make his debut over the weekend. Bryan got the call from the Mariners. That happened after the waiver pod was recorded on Friday. AJSmith-Shawver showed up out of the bullpen for Atlanta. We've got a June pitcher rankings update from Eno, so a few questions for me that I wanted to bring to the table, and then some Mailbag Monday questions as well. So lots of ground to cover, internet permitting. We begin with Andrew Abbott, who I think is extremely difficult to evaluate for several reasons. One, the pre-tacked ball that he started with at Double-A. Two, a very brief stop at AAA. And three, getting to pitch half of his games at Great American Ballpark as he breaks in for the Reds on Monday night.
Yeah, I tend to, I'm a little shy there, given that even somebody that the model loves in Graham Ashcraft, and even somebody that the model loves even more in Hunter Green, is not necessarily like thriving the way that you might expect someone with his scout pedigree and his background and his model numbers, and you've got a whole set of issues there in Great American. So I tend to kind of be out on Abbott, but there are things that are in his favor, and certainly some amazing minor league strikeout numbers.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff's going to play, at least in terms of piling up whiffs. Whether or not we get anything close to ratios we've seen from him in the good stops in the minors, that seems like a bit of a reach. The projections that are out there have a 4.67 ERA and a 1.37 whip. That comes from the bat. I think Steamer's a little more optimistic at 4.03 and 1.29. Both systems have him at or above a strikeout per inning. So that'll play. I mean, we're talking about someone who's going to be almost certainly a mixed league pickup, at least a deeper mixed league pickup come weekend, but not necessarily the high ceiling you'd expect given some of the successes we've seen at a few different stops.
Reese Olson, one thing I'm nervous about Abbott in particular is just that the fastball stuff plus, which is the most reliable of the stuff pluses, really the four-seam fastball stuff plus, for him in the minor leagues was 88. And we know that you put that in hand with the, outsized results when he had the pre-tack ball, which is adding spin and adding life and making the fastball better. That puts me sort of in a place where I wonder about the fastball. And if the fastball is only okay, I do think the breaking ball is plus. But he may have to learn how to pitch backwards. There may be like a real adjustment period for him.
It's sort of the opposite of what we've seen from Reese Olson, where the pitches might be more like high quality big league pitches in Reese Olson's arsenal, even though the results throughout his time in the minors, they don't really jump off the page. You see a lot of ERAs above 4, some struggles at AAA this year, but lots of strikeouts pretty much everywhere he's pitched since 2021. Occasional issues with control, and he was having those at AAA, but looked pretty good in that debut against the White Sox on Friday night, I believe. Time a little bit challenging for me as I continue to ease into dad life. But all in all, I thought that was a lot of success from Reese Olson, more than I expected right away. My concerns were really more about the schedule, because I think what we're looking for with Tiger starters in particular are runs of opportunities at home. But if you look at Reese Olson's upcoming schedule, he's going to make his second big league start at Philadelphia on Wednesday. That's a tough spot in terms of park and matchup. And if you flash forward to next week, he's got Atlanta at home. So he gets one of the best offenses in the league in his home park. That's going to be kind of sketchy as part of a 2-start week. And then he goes on the road to Target Field to face the Twins. So part of what kept me away from Olson is just not liking those matchups once we were able to start using him.
It's true. I'm a little nervous about throwing him in Philadelphia. I picked him up in a few places and will not, in weekly places, and will not pitch him in his first week. So a bit of a stash and see. But I'm a little excited about that two-step. I think that, the Braves offense is amazing, but also it's a good park for him. And they haven't necessarily seen him, so there's not a lot of familiarity with his shapes in particular. And you get a two-step early on, so I'm excited about that. And Michael Lorenzen is showing us how that park can help someone who's average-ish play up. So I'm excited about him. His major league numbers looked a lot like his minor league numbers, which we talked about here on Project Prospect and other places. And I think that you're right. I think that the struggles with command is the issue. Even in his debut, he had 94 location plus on the sinker and 96 on the slider. So those are below average numbers, obviously in small samples that I wouldn't normally report, except that you kind of want to think, like what could be the issue here? And I guess, for a guy that has four pitches that are above average by Stuff Plus, and a 110 overall Stuff Plus, I guess the answer is, watch the slider command, watch the fastball command. If you can't get into count leverage, that's how you get into trouble. That's how you show the strikeout rates he's had and the ERAs he's had. So it's going to be all about getting into count leverage, getting those good counts, and doing so with pitches that he hasn't necessarily demonstrated a great ability to command. But this is totally someone I fall for. It's just like multiple pitches with stuff in a good park and seemingly a lot of runway. I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, the scouting grades from Fangraphs: 55 fastball, 55 slider with a future 60, 50 curve, and a 70 changeup. And all of that comes with 30 command. 30 command. I say this a lot. I don't know if I've seen this combination before. I'm sure we've seen, very good stuff with command grades in the 30s before, but 4 pitches where everything is at least a 50.
You'd think if he could repeat 4 pitches, he could command them. So I'm still in. I can see the flaws, but even the regular projection systems are fairly nice. You have to remember that it's a 4.30 ERA is average. So 4 of the 5 projections on Fangraphs have him as above average. In ERA, and the whiffs seem to be there.
League context is very important as you think about what you see in projections right now and what your own expectations are for players as they debut. We saw Bryan Woo debut over the weekend. He was not part of our conversation on the Friday waiver show because we didn't know at the time that he was actually coming to the big leagues. Marco Gonzalez went on the IL as part of a corresponding move. By results, Bryan Woo jumps off the page in terms of excellent strikeout rates, good walk rates in the minors, keeps the ball in the park. By underlying numbers, you have a few questions about the arsenal. It was a rough debut. He went just 2 innings, and drawing the Rangers, this year's version of the Rangers for your first big league start, is a tough assignment. So I'm curious what you saw from Bryan Woo and where you think the next couple of turns might go, since it looks like he's going to get another opportunity or two. Even though they've got 2 off days on the schedule this week, he could start over the weekend against the Angels. If he sticks around for another week, he gets a home turn against the White Sox. Another off day on the schedule next week, too. So 3 off days over the span of about 10 days for this Mariners team, which makes things a little easier to manage if they decide they want to be careful with Bryan Woo.
Bryce Miller is struggling, so he could push past Bryce Miller, but it's not like Woo's debut suggested that that's necessarily the next thing that's going to happen. I think there's whereas with Olson, I think that there's anybody who pitches well gets a rotation spot. I'm not sure that's necessarily true in Seattle, where they have veterans like Marco Gonzalez, they have Chris Flexen, they have a clear shot at staying in the wild card race. I don't think that they that Bryan Woo will necessarily. He could pitch well and go back down, is what I'm saying. And the other thing that I see for Bryan Woo, I don't know if it's a trick of what happened specifically. Like, he only pitched 2 innings, right? So would he, if he had pitched 5 innings, would we have seen the changeup more? Would we have seen the curve more? Would we have seen these other pitches more? Because all we did see in the 2 innings that he threw were the 2 fastballs and the slider. So I'm not sure how deep his arsenal is. And then the other thing that really made me nervous was, that the fastball, four-seam fastball shape wasn't amazing. And the slider is a super sweeper. I mean, like 18 inches, big old frisbee. He didn't get a single whiff on it. And so I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with the fact that it's a big old sweeper, and the lefties in particular were a problem for him. And we didn't really see him do something different other than fastballs and sliders, even to the lefties. So I think there's some concern for me there with Bryan Woo. A little bit more concern than I have with some of the other young arms that we're going to talk about today.
So Bryan Woo was on my radar more for keeper and dynasty leagues. In the XFL league that I play in, the one that I co-manage with Ryan Bloomfield, we have monthly supplemental drafts. We don't do weekly fab. We have deep enough rosters because of the minor leaguers and the benches to go 4 weeks between sets of pickups. And then you do a supplemental draft on Sunday nights, which I actually like kind of a lot as opposed to weekly fab. It doesn't work as well in redraft as it does in keeper because the rosters are smaller. All that's to say, Woo was someone that was available in that draft because he wasn't previously rostered as a minor leaguer. It was more of a 2024 play. It was like, let's just pick him up. He's cheap. He'll be an inexpensive keeper if we like what we see. If it doesn't work out, no big deal. We're cutting someone who we're definitely not going to keep to make room for him. So I think it kind of sounds like there's legitimate reliever risk if it doesn't go well, and given the quality of their rotation, that could happen. But I think he will get a little bit of a window because the Gonzalez injury is a forearm strain, and they've already had a few other injuries chip away at some of their depth guys. I think it was Easton McGee who got a call up earlier this year. He's hurt. Ray's down for the year. Flexen's already in the bullpen. So there's a lot of moving parts in Seattle, and maybe, just maybe, because they're a team that seems to want to skip pitchers over AAA, maybe there's a chance he sticks around a little bit longer. But I do like him better in those long-term formats where he can iron out some of the issues.
Crazy strikeout rates in the minor leagues.
Yeah, I was trying to pull up a leaderboard before my internet died. Before I was looking at AA pitchers from the last 5 seasons who had strikeout rates and walk rates kind of similar to what Bryan Woo was doing, and there were a handful of disappointing names on there. It was mostly good prospects, the kinds of guys that were underperformers. I mean, Roansy Contreras has been an underperformer. He was in that group. I think Tobias Myers, who's bounced around from Cleveland to Tampa Bay to Milwaukee and is still in the minor leagues. He's someone who had some success similar to Bryan Woo at that level, and it hasn't worked out for him. There was a guy, Isaac Matson, I believe, for the Angels, who hasn't had it click yet. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's more of a question of, do you trust Seattle to help him continue to refine the arsenal? Because Bryan Woo got to the big leagues a lot faster than expected. For a 6th round pick from 2 years ago, no one expected him to be in a rotation right now. So they may have to find a way to maybe narrow the arsenal for the short term, try to get 4 or 5 innings per start.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not, this might be far from the best version of him that we see.
I bet you he ends up being a glue guy. He's a guy who they use all his options this year. He comes up and he's in different roles. He ends up being kind of the long man out of the bullpen. Maybe the guy who takes over for Marco Gonzalez if, they want to win the game and it's looking a little iffy or whatever, I don't necessarily see him as a set it and forget it kind of guy.
Yeah. How do you see him compared to maybe Gavin Stone, who has been demoted, as we've talked about? Who would you be more inclined to bet on in those long-term leagues where both might be available?
I like him more than Stone, but I like him a little bit less, I think, than Reese Olson. I like him a little bit less than another name that we have on the rundown that people are looking at right now, AJSmith-Shawver. And Smith-Shawver and Woo, I think, will be used in similar ways this year. Will help us get through this season. Not necessarily declare one of these rotation spots your own. I see those a little bit crowded in both situations. Both win now teams. They're both players that don't have a ton of innings on their resume, and so, I think there's some, how many innings do we get from this guy? And I don't know that either of them is necessarily like a finished product, quote unquote. And so Smith-Shawver, the reason I like him a little bit better than Wu is the four-seam fastball stuff plus is really good. And the slider is average-ish. And the curveball has a ton of movement, does not score well by stuff plus, but give me a guy with a great fastball and figuring the rest of the stuff out is, I think, a great recipe for success. And especially in the roles that these guys are going to have, I think it'd be better to have a better fastball. You're going to be in, 2-3 inning roles probably most likely. And those roles require, blow them away with the fastball and have a good enough secondary. And I see that with Smith-Shawver. He got whiffs on his breaking ball, even though the stuff plus wasn't amazing.
I think tricky because with the lack of quality starters available in a lot of the deeper leagues that we're playing in, the multi-inning relievers, the glue guys, could end up being uniquely valuable over these next 4 months. We have a long way to go. We need innings. We need chances the vulture wins. We need to make ratios better. And if you're getting multiple inning performances twice a week, 2-3 innings, whatever it might be, a total of 5 innings in a week from Smith-Shawver, or even like Dre Jamison, who's back in the bullpen right now for Arizona, those options could be better most weeks than your worst starter in some instances, depending on how deep your league is. So I think that's the other part of the equation, aside from how likely is it that this guy's going to stretch out and actually join the rotation. Like, you have to factor that into the calculus too. But even if they don't join the rotation, some of these guys can be very productive for us the way they're being utilized.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing going on in Atlanta too, where they're giving Mike Soroka, what looks like the role, but he's not performing that well. And the model numbers for Soroka aren't great either. The changeup has been flat. It has less ride than his sinker, and that's been true ever since he's been injured. Which 56 stuff plus, maybe that's a miss. Maybe the model is just it's a changeup. It's 9 innings. Maybe it's not getting. But it is very rare in baseball to have a changeup that has less drop than your fastball. And so there's something strange going on there, and the results are not great. So I suppose there is a little bit of daylight there for Smith-Shawver to maybe elbow his way past the Dylan Dodds and Jared Schusters of the world.
Step 1 has already happened. We have some breaking news. If you want to do the riff, I'll leave the window open here.
What is the breaking news?
Michael Soroka has been sent to AAA.
No way.
Yep. David O'Brien.
They only gave
from the
him
Athletic.
2 chances. Wow. I mean, this teams have stuff plus numbers. They are evaluating players like this. And, some part of you could say, it's Mike Soroka. He's finally healthy. He's got a track record. You got to leave him up. And then the other part of you says, well, he's got a negative K-BB. The stuff plus numbers are awful. The whiff numbers are awful. There's a lot of process that's going wrong here, as well as results.
Yeah, and I don't know how much you want to read into the success that he was beginning to have at AAA before they brought him back. I mean, the last 30 days at AAA, 3.86 ERA, 1.18 WHIP, 21 Ks, and 18 2/3.
But
that's
not amazing
fine.
Strikeout or whiff totals.
Right, just kind of getting by, getting good results without doing it in a dominant sort of way.
If you took his name off of those results, I'm not sure that anybody would be pointing to that and be like, "Oh, this pitcher's coming up."
You could see, blind resume, I would guess that JP France was doing something similar and he didn't get the call until injuries happened, right? So maybe that's what Mike Soroka is at this point. Maybe he's that extra guy that they can keep stretched out, and I don't know if he can fix it on the fly. Maybe he needs a full off season to go through a full healthy off season to go through some more adjustments before he's going to get back to being the guy that he was. So I'm disappointed. I was hoping he'd get a longer window, but Atlanta is an organization making quick decisions. They're not sitting around waiting for things for several months. And we talked about it on the 3-0 show. Memorial Day, last Monday, tends to be that cutoff where a lot of teams start to say, okay, this isn't working. Let's make a big adjustment. I was surprised. You told me before the show that Anthony Volpe was available in your TGFBI league. It's a 15-team mixed league. It's a pretty deep league. He's hitting homers. He's stealing bases. He had a rough May for sure. But here we are sitting on June 5th, and the Yankees are being patient so far. So you picked him up, so you must have an expectation that they will continue to be patient, and it probably didn't cost you that much in fab, relatively speaking. So I'm just curious, how did you come to this conclusion, and what gives you hope for Volpe to start to put more pieces together in the next couple of months?
Well, I'm having a little buyer's remorse, actually.
Uh-oh.
Because I kind of just thought, if Anthony Volpe came up right now without any of what he'd done, he would cost more than he cost me. He cost me like $100 out of 1,000, right?
What was the next highest bid? Do you happen to remember? Or
$3 less than mine.
You didn't overpay by the market forces.
Yeah. I think I paid, it was 108 to 105 or something. So, it was like almost a keep him honest bid where I was like, well, I need homers, I need steals. And if this guy was coming up, from the minors, I would bid on him, But now that I'm looking, there's a couple of things that are worrisome. You mentioned that his April was better than his May, and you kind of look at the rolling graphs, you'll see that he's chasing more and hitting fewer fly balls and striking out more. Those are not good things, all those things. And then I thought, well, at least he's playing a solid defense, and he's being what the Yankees need in terms of an everyday shortstop, and he has a -4 outs above average. Which is
interesting. I've seen enough Yankees games and highlights, and I've thought he's looked pretty good at shortstop overall. I don't know. Maybe I'm being duped by the pinstripes.
Yeah, and I worry that, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa has a 3 outs above average, and I kind of don't think that this team is going to go backwards like that. They made the decision to take IKF off the position. They put the young guy in, and I was there early in the season for games. I was there for the second and third games of the season, and people were excited about Volpe. I mean, he's a local kid. They were chanting his name. It's, he's a guy they love. Everybody wants him to succeed. So I kind of just have the feeling he does have a little bit more runway, and that he's done a little bit of enough. And he gives them that speed dimension that, with Bader out, and he's their speedy guy. They just want him to get on base and start wreaking some havoc on base and play a solid defense. I'm not sure he's doing the second half, and the chase rate's going the wrong direction. All that stuff makes me a little nervous that I just blew $100. But at the same time, you can blow $100 on anybody. And the fact that this guy has retained his role is interesting to me. I think he's retained it through some thick and thin. And if they give him another month and he shows some adjustments, I think. And long term, how do you feel about him long term?
Generally good. I think it's not totally unlike the optimism I have for Gunnar Henderson, though I would say I feel even better about Henderson. It's easy to see the differences. A little bit
more signs of life, and he chases less, but
yeah. But you can live with a 31
hard, and he runs real fast, and he's a pretty good player.
10.6% barrel rate, so he's making enough hard contact where he doesn't look overmatched that way. I think it goes back to what you said at the very beginning. If the Yankees had decided we need more time with Anthony Volpe at AAA, we want to give him 2 more months at AAA and make sure that he gets 300 plate appearances at that level. He had 99 there at the end of last season. The level of excitement upon arrival, even if he had done similar, let's say he got a little better at AAA, kind of split the difference between his AA slash line and his AAA slash line and give him that same kind of power speed mix. What would the bid have been upon arrival? Triple what you had to pay, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And I think this goes back to a conversation we've had on a few occasions where you take a really good prospect and make them struggle for a little bit.
Take
in the
some
big leagues.
Shine off.
Take some shine off. The projections go pretty hard to the tank in many of those instances,
because
and
they
suddenly
weren't
you
that
get a big
positive to
value.
begin with. Because the projections don't love prospects to begin with.
Generally, you're right. Yeah, Kyle Tucker was a good example of a player like this, where he was so young for the level everywhere he played too, and that's the case with Volpe. You look and you say, look, this still works.
22-year-old in the big leagues.
So the problem comes from, well, so we're only playing for this season. Like we're analyzing two different things. We're analyzing Volpe for the next 4 months versus Volpe for the next 4 years. The next 4 years still look like they're gonna be very good. The other part of all of this, it's just the way numbers work. Let's say there's 6 months in a season, because there are. You could have your worst 2 months in the first 2 months. There are established veterans that do that, right? There's 30 combinations that you could have for your worst 2 months, because any one of the 6 months could be your worst. Then the remaining 5, any one of those 5, 6 times 5 is 30. I think I did the math right. And so that means like 3.5% of the player pool has its worst 2 months to begin the season. And those are the players that end up on the waiver wire, because in the case of Volpe, you do have to worry about demotion. Young player, it's more viable compared to Ahmed Rosario, who's not going to get optioned to AAA and probably isn't going to get put on the bench either, just because they're looking at him as a guy in the final year of a contract, right? Before they lose him to free agency. They're going to keep playing him. But these are concerns nonetheless. So
yeah, either they're going to be bad and trade him, or he's going to get better and be part of the reason they got better.
Right. So
they don't want to kill his trade value, and there's not really that much options that are better.
So I think here it's not totally unlike the situation in Colorado, but the difference is Ezequiel Tovar was horrible in April and showed a lot of growth by comparison in May. He looked more like he belonged in the big leagues in May. It was a 266, 310, 457. It's a 93 WRC plus. You can live with that for a 21-year-old shortstop if you're happy with his defense. I think the Rockies are happy with Tovar's defense. But in both cases, even with the Rockies not contending, they could say, well, he's just struggling too much for too long of a stretch. We're going to send him down. The Yankees are more complicated because they're contending. Every single game matters in terms of trying to win the division, trying to make sure they get into the playoffs. I like both of these players. I trust Volpe a lot more. Volpe's chasing less than Tovar. He's stealing more bases than Tovar. The power looks more legit. All those things are good. And he's also in a good hitter-friendly environment. Team situation is tougher. But even if he's in the bottom third of this lineup for the next 2 months, the counting stats are probably better from Volpe than they are from Tovar if playing time's equal. Assuming Aaron Judge's toe is okay. We're still waiting for an update on that.
It's funny that you mentioned Ahmed Rosario. I took a look at the biggest the biggest recovery last year between the first 4 months and the first 2 months. The latter 4 months and the first 2 months. And Ahmed Rosario is on there.
Yeah.
I think the biggest recovery is pretty obvious. Is Marcus Semien. He was the biggest story last year in terms of a player that started out poorly. And I just wrote last week in looking my notes column about how Marcus Semien was switching teams and there was a lockout, and had young kids. He's waking up at 6 a.m. to send them off to school. So just really a lot of factors on the personal level that I think contributed to that poor start. And then, he got to where he gets with his hard work and quality and talent that he's got. So Semien was one of those. Nathaniel Lowe was a second. I think maybe there was a little bit of a talent breakout there. Andrew McCutchen, though, just a veteran that had 2 bad months and then 4 good months, But then Ahmed Rosario is right there behind Julio Rodriguez as guys who had really better second halves. He had a 118 WRC plus in the second half and a 67 in the first 2 months. And so as much as we look at these players and we try to find these process-based trends and say, Volpe's chasing more, that's a big problem. Do you think there was a lot going on for Ahmed Rosario in the first 2 months last year that you would say, oh yeah, he's about to figure this out, and now you look at Rosario right now, you say, well, he's striking out too much, and he's his worst, second worst swing strike rate of his career, and he's not barreling the ball, and I don't know, man. I wonder. I don't think Bryan Rocchio is necessarily better, and I wonder that this player. I don't. It wouldn't surprise me at all if this player had another 4 months where he hit 270 and hit 8 or 9 homers and stole 10 bases and ended up with very much the same line as he did last year.
And that's exactly what all the projections suggest he's going to do.
Yeah, right.
Hard hit rate's as good as it's ever been. 45.7%. It's a career best hard hit rate. So there's got to be some bad luck cooked in there for Amed Rosario so far. Even if there are some flaws, the flaws he's showing are flaws that he's shown us in the past. There's nothing new happening here.
Yeah. So
really nothing.
I mean, that's why we hew close to projections. At the same time, we try to discern between the different, process-based stats to see if like maybe a player is a little bit more likely than another player to make it happen. And then the last pit is always the team context, which just makes it so hard. I mean, there's no projection that's going to tell you that Rocchio is the solution. And I would say that if you look at the team usage, I don't think that they necessarily think Rocchio, like that they are going to take Rocchio and replace Amed Rosario with him. When Rocchio comes up, I think Rocchio's come up this year where he hasn't played and gone back down.
Yeah, he's 22. He's a switch hitter. I think Fangraphs has him down for a 34.4% hard hit rate at AAA. Just one homer in 47 games at that level. So it's much more doubles than anything else.
106.5 max EV at AAA that's below average.
Yeah, what's going to make Bryan Rocchio a good fantasy player is stealing a lot of bases potentially. He's 12 for 12 as a base stealer in 47 games at AAA. If he's going to bring 30 steal speed and a good average, decent OBP, and he's going to score runs because he could be atop the order.
They can't afford to put another guy like that in the lineup. I'm sorry, not with Rosario and Straw and like.
No, he would just replace Rosario, right? If there's a team that's contending, and maybe Cleveland still is, you could replace Rocchio with Rosario and still not be giving up. And I think that's what Cleveland does. You mentioned this, I think, on 3-0 show last week. You can play the middle, as they often do. Cleveland is Oakland East. I've seen that on Twitter. I think it's RG Top, one of the guys I like to follow for Brewer stuff. He's right. Like, that's a fair way to put it. They run thin budgets. They play both sides. They are constantly wheeling and dealing and trying to squeeze every ounce out of their 40-man roster as much as any team does. That's how they operate. So you can trade Amed Rosario and still be good enough in the Central.
Better, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
like just like better player development.
We're talking about pre-2021. Right. Yeah. So that's where they live. And if they make that move, is that a white flag move for the Guardians? No, it's not.
But would it necessarily be Rocchio over Arias?
I've seen Arias playing all over so far. He's 23.
Seems like a utility guy. He strikes out a lot more than they usually like.
More barrels, so more like a guy we would like. Doesn't run.
Not amazing barrels.
Hits the ball on the ground a little too much.
Yeah.
Chases a little too much, but young. When you look at his overall body of work and you go back to 2021 at AAA, he was a 21-year-old at that level, coming off of a lost season, skipping over AA. He had a good year at AAA that season.
Mm-hmm.
That was a 115 WRC plus, which for the age is very good.
Yeah, you have to remember that, because even when he re-upped and he wasn't as good the next year, he had an 89 WRC plus. We just had that math that was presented to us by Nate Stoltz, and we talked about on Project Prospect that, in 2022, he's a 22-year-old in AAA, which the average age is something like 26, 27. So that 89 WRC plus is not as bad as it looks.
This is this is kind of reminding me of, it's not Isaac Paredes. It's a guy that we've talked about the Frankenstein. You take all the best attributes of a player and you smash them all together. You're like, okay, you've shown this here and you showed this other skill here. If you did it all at once, you'd be really interesting.
Yeah, like if he had his 22% strikeout rate from that AAA year, and he had the walk rates he's shown in the major leagues, and he had his best power numbers, he could put together something special.
I actually kind of like him. The more I look at him, I see more good, and maybe it's because I'm so frustrated by the other types of hitters that Cleveland has. I like that they're giving him some playing time, but he could also get passed over for guys that they like a little better, the more well-rounded players. He could be stuck in that glue guy role because they have depth.
If they ever do that thing that I want them to do, which is sort of buy a power bat by collecting some of their prospects together, a power bat with team control, not some sort of rental, like the Eloy Jimenez thing we floated on the 3-0 show.
That was the other reason why I like RD Top. He suggested the Brewers should swoop in and do that. I didn't suggest that. So...
yeah, two teams that have surprisingly bad offenses, despite they both have identities, right? Like they both have players they like and types that they like, and I could be convinced that both of those ideas are good ideas. Like is it a good idea to have a lot of contact hitters? Like, yeah, I mean, like, sure, that's great. But the power guys that they've tried to supplement with those have not worked out.
I mean, we talked about Jesse Winker a few weeks ago. He has been
I thought that was good process, but he's just not been the same guy since the surgeries, I think.
Yeah, just never made it back healthy. I mean, as far as your power hitters that do consistent damage, it's basically Rowdy and William Contreras, and then secondary power sources, you get a little from Yelich. Adames has been hurt, he just got hurt recently.
Yeah.
But he should be better than he's been so far.
And you can see their process in the past seems like it's solid. Like they got Adames for, injury starters when they had like arms to spare, They got Rowdy on like a claim, I feel like.
It was either a claim or a very minor trade. I forget offhand if it was completely free or not. The Jays squeezed them off the roster because they didn't have room. And it was a minor trade. Bowden Francis and Trevor Richards.
Yeah, Trevor Richards, they got a reliever for him. But I mean, again, this is twice that they've traded relievers for people that are contributing maybe more than anybody else in their lineup. So, and at the same time, they've had a hard time like putting together a full lineup.
They've had a ton of injuries. So Winker is finally on the IL now. So you add him. Garrett Mitchell got hurt early in the year.
All season. Mitchell's been hurt all season.
Nothing from Urias. Recently, not getting anything from Adames. That's only been like a week. Tyrone Taylor's back on the IL. And so many of the injuries on the pitching side, too. This team has been absolutely rocked by injuries between Woodruff, Ashby before that was going to be an important guy, even as kind of the glue guy. And they've reached down to the point. They're starting Julio Teheran, dude. Like that.
I can't believe that.
That is unreal. And Colin Ray, both of those guys are in the rotation. Oh, and Adrian Hauser's in the rotation because Eric Lauer and Wade Miley are hurt. They have been crushed by injuries and somehow have kept it afloat.
4K9.
You could only do that for so long before everything falls apart. I don't know if there's a lot of internal help coming for the pitching side. His walk rate's been bad. Ethan Small's moved to the bullpen, so maybe we'll see Small in that multi-inning relief role. I got to see how they're using him more recently.
At least at AAA. Maybe if he had a couple of games in a row with a little bit fewer walks, you could see Gasser.
Walk rate's been brutal, but it's like, do you take the chance on the guy with the bad walk rate at least instead of Teheran? Like I probably would at some point. Like how comfortable are you throwing Julio Teheran at this point? I'm not
at all. Let me see if I've got some model numbers on Gasser. Yes, I do. Gasser, let's see here. 113 stuff plus on the curveball. That's good. 100 on the sinker. 97 on the cutter. 95 on the slider. 88 on the changeup. 85 on the four seam. So it doesn't love his four seam, but I love that he has 6 pitches. And I see an out pitch in the curveball. And I bet you the slider's fine, even though the stuff plus is mediocre. So it's an interesting grouping though. None of the location pluses are above average. In fact, they're all pretty bad.
Yeah. The other part of the Brewers that I think I keep going back to is with all the problems they've had and being a team that has an 88 WRC plus, I think, entering play on Monday, 25% K rate as a team. Everyone's clamoring for Ellie De La Cruz to get the call up from the Reds. No one's clamoring for Jackson Chourio to get that look from the Brewers. But if you fancy yourself a team that should be in the playoffs and you want to win that division and you are depleted by injuries the way they have been, you have to at least consider it if you feel good about how he's playing at the AA level. Just skip him over AAA entirely, or give him 2 weeks, 3 weeks at AAA, make sure he doesn't fall on his face, and then give him the call.
Yeah, he's not going to turn 20. Like, you can't wait till he turns 20. He's not turning 20 this year. I would say that the last time I looked at his WRC plus in AA this year, it was worse. So I think he's on his way. And if we're doing this math again, I mean, he's 19 in AA. Supposedly you would add 100 points of WRC plus for him to get him to average. So
he hits ridiculous home runs.
199 WRC plus.
My favorite Jackson Chourio home run so far was like a 99 up at the top of the zone that he hit out opposite field. I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah,
let's do that.
A little bit outside swing strike rates, but could be somebody that is just a bit of a free swinger that still hits for power. But
man, this is going to be fun. He is going to be a fun player. If they call him up soon, growing pains are clearly part of it, but he's going to be a really fun player to watch for a long time.
I also think they have 2 buy low starters on their team. I continue to think Corbin Burns is going to figure it out, and he's going to strike more people out to be commensurate with his stuff numbers, and I think we've seen a little bit of that recently. And then there's another name on there that we've loved forever that I think is a buy low opportunity. That both of those guys getting back on playing could be great. Freddy Peralta looks like not great by results, but all of the projections say better is coming, and the stuff is there.
They need it badly. I mean, I'm patiently keeping him in my lineup start after start, even when he hits the occasional speed bump. It's not great so far. 4.62 ERA, 141 WHIP, 23% K rate is a career low in the face of a walk rate that's still normal, home run rate that's become a problem, but that's not usually an issue at all for Freddy. It's how he gets away with that slightly elevated walk rate. I think the most encouraging sign of all, fastball velo, 94.7 for him working as a starter. That's a career high for Freddy Peralta. That to me is a big part of the answer to why would you be optimistic about him going forward based on what you've seen. I saw your projections with Jordan Rosenblum, sub 4 ERA, 27% K rate the rest of the year, and he's got a 100 location plus. So I think that's a slight improvement for Freddy as well. There's some underlying adjustments he seems to have made that maybe are going to make him a better starter in the long run. So I think this is important for the Brewers, but something that we can probably try and take advantage of maybe via trade in leagues that allow us to make trades.
He has a real tension, I think, between, he has these 2 dominant pitches in the fastball and slider, and then the idea that he wants to turn the ball over, he wants to turn the lineup over, he wants to go deeper into games, he wants to be a starter, not just a 5-inning reliever or whatever. So he is throwing the curve and the change, a little bit more than he has in the past. And adding that together means he's throwing the fastball and slider less, but it's all to good cause. And I think that, there could be a sort of a good mix for him in there where he's like, okay, the changeup's going to be more of a show me, the curve is going to be my third pitch. The changeup's going to be a show me. And that's how I'm going to avoid some of these homers. So there's going to be, I think, a little bit of a mixed tweak that I would guess in the next few weeks. And we'll see that strikeout rate get back to normal and get some nice zeros out of him.
My hope is that by the time I get back to Wisconsin, I didn't mean to suggest that I have a big move and then not tell people where I'm going. I'm moving back to Wisconsin. Everything's great. California's wonderful. California's been great to me and my family.
Very expensive.
It's very expensive. And the childcare alone, we started doing more math. We knew this was coming. It's like, maybe the third year in California is going to be a little too expensive to be fun, and that was the final solution. So we're going back to Wisconsin, which is great. They brought back buffalo tenders at Culver's, which is the reason why I left in the first place. So now I can move back. Buffalo tenders are huge, man.
Always way easier as a child if you're near family. I mean, that was a big part of our move. We were in New York for 10 years. And we didn't have any family nearby that could help with the baby, and we just looked around and said, I don't know, it's going to be pretty hard.
Like everything you like about a place, if you don't have a kid, completely changes, I think, when you have one. So anyone who's experienced that knows, like, well,
I
hey,
love going back to New York now. I'm like,
sure,
no kids. Yeah, I love this place.
We'll probably come back and visit several times in the years ahead because it's been so good to us. So the move is only a month away. So yes, second time in 3 years that I'm doing the big cross country move. This year, my dad drew the short straw and gets to drive with me back. So yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. But the question we had that actually kind of connects to Freddy Peralta comes from, oh no, there was one other thing. I hope that Freddy Peralta has improved enough to where I don't feel like I'm going to get kicked out of the supper clubs and bars when he pitches. Because I think I got the ass so bad one night when Freddy Peralta was getting squeezed in a start, and part of it was his own fault because his command has always been kind of shaky. I was almost asked to leave when I went out for my fish fry. I was getting belligerent about it. I was asked to leave by my family, not by the establishment itself. They're like, you're unpleasant right now. Like, why don't you just take your food to go and go eat in the car if you're going to be this much of a jerk? So I'm just hoping Freddy has grown to the point where I can still, go out to eat with my family and not have it ruin my night. But the question we had about Location Plus from Olaf is Location Plus shape adjusted. For example, does the model look at a four seam and say these are good places for four seams, or does it look at the shape of the four seam and say these are good locations for four seams that act like this one? I guess the differences could be subtle, but I would imagine that for a fastball with insane ride and velo, you can get away with going higher out of the zone, or maybe for a certain type of gyro, you can always stick it in the low and away pocket, and it's incredible even without typically great shape.
Yeah. This is on the list of things to do. It's a great question. We do not do it right now. We do not shape adjust. And by pitch type adjusting, which we do, we are shape adjusting, but not in a refined way, as he's pointing out. So, yeah, generally four-seamers have more ride, and so you can get a general four-seam map. But there are kind of more two-plane four-seamers and super riders and the kind of the cut four-seamers, the guys that don't have any sort of horizontal movement on their four-seamers, the cut riders. So doing that would be more specific. That does bring up some philosophical questions about what you want your measurement to measure, and the role, the intertwined role of stuff and command, and how it might be impossible to separate them, but do we really want to separate them? Another way of saying this is, are you, by shape adjusting your Location Plus, actually bringing Stuff Plus into your Location Plus? And if you are doing that, are you muddying the waters, or are you creating a better stat? And some of that just comes out in the validation process. And you say, well, our new Location Plus with the shape adjusting is better, so we're just going to go with it, and that's fine. That's a way to do it. That's probably how we will do it. Does it make the model more predictive? Is it stickier this way? That'll be something that we'll look at. But there is a philosophical question. It's like, we are trying to separate these things to stuff and command, and like really trying to keep them separate. And, is shape adjusting Location Plus kind of bringing them closer back together again? But a lot of times you can just be qualitative about it or quantitative about it and just be like, does it make the model better? Then I like it. and I have an inkling that it might make the model better. I think of it a lot of times with Adam Ottavino. It's like Adam Ottavino's big old sideways breaking ball. Does that have, different Location Pluses than Logan Gilbert's little, tight power slider? So there's definitely something there, and it's a great question.
All right. Well, thanks for writing in, Olaf. I got a few other questions about the pitcher rankings. A few guys that popped up at various spots that I think are challenging to evaluate right now. Aaron Nola fell to number 26 in the rankings that went up. And if you haven't checked them out and you don't have a subscription, you can do that. $2 a month gets you in the door at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. The main question I have about Nola is, where did the strikeouts go? I think Aaron Nola has shown more variance than I would expect for a pitcher with his skills. By results, you look at the ERAs and whips that he's thrown up during his career, and you're like, wow, the good years are like even better than you'd expect them to be, and the disappointing years are worse than they should be. And that's probably a whole conversation unto itself. But 21.5% K rate this year for Aaron Nola. That's a big drop from where he's been for most of his career. It's the lowest strikeout rate he's had since he debuted all the way back in 2015. So you pair that with the jump in homers compared to last season and quickly see how the ERA is now up in the high fours. But the strikeouts specifically, do you see those coming back from Nola? And what's been the problem for him through these first 2 months?
Well, his fastball velocity is down, and the way I've been explained it is that he doing it on purpose, and that it's his way of dealing with the pitch clock.
Okay.
But I see that as a problem. And I'm beginning to suspect that he sees it as a problem too, because it is ramping back up. So he was comfortably 91.5 and low 92s until about 5 starts ago. And the last 5 starts have gone 93.3, 91.5, again 92.5, 92.3, 93.4. So a little bit of an inkling of like maybe he's getting tired of these results and is going to throw harder, but that's something that's sort of secondary. The machines can't see that. So the machines see lower fastball velocity. He has the lowest stuff plus of anybody in my top 30, other than Zach Eflin, who's got a great home park compared to Aaron Nola. And the projected strikeout rate is about the same as his actual strikeout rate. So I just looked across that and said, oof, like this is Stuff Plus is capturing this. This is a guy he wasn't ever a guy that had, 120 Stuff Plus overall. But this is down for him. And so I see stuff that's down, projections that are down, bad home park. I mean, if you're running a team, he's still a top 30 pitcher. He's still your ace. It's okay. But you might also say, hey, I don't know, man. Maybe you got to at least sit the 93.
Yeah, I think when I look at Nola right now, I mean, the thing that he's always done well is have a pretty deep arsenal. His location strategies look good as far as like where he's throwing stuff. This all makes sense. We popped up the Savant page on YouTube if you happen to be watching there, but it doesn't look like a location problem. It is interesting that
he's always been good at this. Yeah,
we probably have other pitchers who have adjusted their own velocity, right? They've taken a little off in hopes of not wearing down with the pitch clock, and now we're probably far enough in. If you've had a dozen starts like Nola has, and you say this is just not going the way I thought it would, you'd make those individual sorts of adjustments. So the optimism probably comes from a very long track record, great location, all the ingredients other than velo still being there, and the trust and belief that the velo drop is in fact by control, and seeing those little upticks more recently maybe give you that extra confidence you need. But even if, like, I was asked about this maybe a week ago on the RotoWire XM show, and I said, well, if you look at Nola in this package, if the velo doesn't go back up, he's probably an SP3 or an SP4 the rest of the way. In this environment, that's still someone you're going to use just about all the time.
Yeah,
it's still good, even though it's not what you hoped for, not what you paid for back on draft day.
And it's really tough to it would be tough for me to sell low, even though I have him ranked lower than maybe some people, because he's useful, he's healthy, he's there, he's going to get you wins. Like what are you going to get back? If you were going to sell low, like I think the most likely thing is somebody would be trying to sell high and sending you like Bryce Miller and you know what I mean, like two sort of guys that you can't depend on as much in terms of projections, right? Like at least Aaron Nola is projectable, veteran, gonna be there. They're not gonna send him down. You know what I mean? Like there's, he's gonna be there. And for what it's worth, my projections are not actually that far from anybody else's. We had a straight 4 ERA and a 25% strikeout rate. We've got a 3.91 from Zips with a 26% strikeout rate. So we're just a little bit more pessimistic, but you can see that in our projections, it gets to 4s really quickly. He's the first 4, in my rankings projected wise. So I did push him a little bit higher than, and Eflin is a 3.91 or Joe Musgrove is a 3.86. I have him higher than those guys. But you also see that by the time you're in the mid 30s in my rankings, everybody's over 4. So you kind of have to, on some level, just recalibrate and think, 3.91, a 4, that's okay.
Another pitcher I thought we should talk about today. Maybe there's not time for two, but there's one for sure. Nathan Eovaldi has been excellent. I just imagine that he's pitched so well, and the team is playing really well. So the team context is probably better than we thought going into the season. It's really hard not to push him into the top 25.
I got some feedback like that.
But when you look at the underlying skills, he's been this guy before. This is what healthy Nathan Eovaldi looks like. Yeah, and I think you could start to argue, though. You could say, well, this is just a great home run rate. This is a very good pitcher with good skills who's also having a nice run of luck on homers, and that's made him play at this elite level. And the other part of this is, like, in my mind, he's one of those players that I'm always wrong on his age. Every single time I look at the age column, like he's only 33. He's not 36. He's not 37, 38. He's 33.
But so, he's an old 33.
He's an old 33.
I mean, just last year, we saw him start out really well, and then the fastball velocity just declined over the entire season. We've seen him multiple times, surgery and pain and missed time. So, some part of this, and I think a huge part of these rankings, that if you disagree, I think often the source of the disagreement is how many innings are you expecting the rest of the way? How much health are you expecting the rest of the way? That in that case, like, he started out 96. He was doing some 97s. His last game was a 95.3. Is that, he started out last year 98s and 97s, and then just about the time June started, 96, 94, 94, 94, 94, never got above 95 again. So there was, I know it sounds a little bit like, oh, he's a slow starter or he's a bad finisher. A lot of that stuff is not predictive. But generally what I'm saying is this is an oft-injured guy who's had great stretches like this before and, has generally not been very sturdy. And so that's baked into the projections a little bit for me.
If you were going to go the challenge trade route, would you offer Eovaldi, if you had him, to get Aaron Nola?
Who I have higher?
You have Nola ranked higher, right?
I mean, the velocity trends are going the right way for Nola and the wrong way for Eovaldi.
Yeah.
And I have Nola ranked higher. I have Nola giving more innings. I have Nola giving more strikeouts. I have Nola getting more wins. So, yes.
It's tough. It's just tough, though. It's tough to actually do it because of
you're staring at a 2.2 ERA. Yeah.
You see the numbers, you're like, wow, I'm giving this away. And I think it's the right process, but doesn't make it any easier to actually.
The way I always make it easier for myself is to just add 2 more players to the deal.
Yeah, right. You balance it out by getting something else.
So I'm gonna send you Eovaldi and this hitter, and you're gonna send me Nola and a better hitter.
And then you might win on both parts. Yeah.
And then I also feel better about trading away the guy with the 2 ERA.
I didn't get all the way through the comments on the rankings, but I wonder if anyone was asking you about the Michael Kopech turnaround and whether or not we could start to believe in that. He came in at number 61 in those ranks. Last 4 starts, a 2.05 ERA, a 0.57 whip, and a 38-4 strikeout to walk ratio, just 3 homers allowed. The thing that caught my eye, though, digging a little more closely into the schedule, was Royals, road against the Guardians, home against the Angels was the one in which he got hit a little bit.
Miami next, I think.
Yeah, it's a good run. And Tigers, home against the Tigers. So 3 out of 4 at home, 3 out of 4 easy matchups for Kopech. But, okay, making your layups, if something's wrong.
Was he Miami next? I think he was next. I'm going to look. I liked his next matchup. But yeah, what you were saying, is it just matchups or?
I think it's more than just matchups, though. This is a level of pitching well that's not just beating up on bad teams. I think this is a guy that's also fixed some of the issues he was having earlier this season. So how much more would you need to see before you start to trust Kopech again and nudge him back up? Because I think at his absolute best, I saw him as kind of a top 30 starting pitcher. And it's not difficult to imagine him getting back to that level if the walk issues he was having earlier in the season are truly fixed. A lot of 3s, 4s, a 5, and a 6 all sprinkled in there in the first 8 starts or so. but the control being better is, I think, a huge part of why he's turned things around recently.
And that's why I'm buying is, this is a guy who's always had good stuff plus, and 114 stuff plus. He's got the highest stuff plus south of 42 in my rankings, and that always had me pushing him up more. The reason I didn't push him up even more than I did was that the projections, the PPERA projected was 444, and I think that has a lot to do with the park factors. And past results, as well as poor command. But here's a guy with bad knees that it seems like they're feeling fine, and he's commanding the ball better. So I could push him. I could push him a little harder into the 50s. I mean, I think you could have an interesting would you rather between him and Tanner Houck. Maybe interesting would you rather between him and Clark Schmidt, who also has good stuff plus numbers and some up and down results. But I do think that once you start pushing him to the low 40s, if you made me do a would you rather between him and Blake Snell or Marcus Stroman or Taj Bradley, I'm more likely leaning to those latter names than Michael Kopech.
I think I'm only Bradley. I think that's the cluster where I'd have him. I think Bradley over Kopech is where I'd be a little more comfortable with Bradley because the control looks better.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle Bradish versus Kopech is tough. Kyle Bradish is tough. I mean, he started turning around in the second half of last year, pitching well right now.
It's not a great fastball. So, I think you're always just nervous with the not a great fastball guy. Where you're like, oh, it's elite breaking ball. But, every once in a while he'll get keyholed and they'll just go off on the fastball,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. So
I'm thinking about in the future, doing some study in the off season about the stickiness of fastball, forcing fastball stuff plus year to year. If that's something that should be emphasized more in the projections, especially year to year. If players with good fastball stuff pluses are better bets as their mixes move and change around them. You know what I mean? Like, if that should be somewhat more emphasized, if we should start picking apart the per pitch type stuff pluses in our projections and weighting them more, that's not something we do yet. You have to remember we're 3 years into stuff plus existing in this form, and we're in the first year of projections. But that's the exciting thing that projections can do for you, is start to pull apart some of the stuff we're talking about and kind of ensconce that in something that's more regimented and weights these things year to year. But I do have my eye on fastball stuff plus as something that might be slightly more important than the rest of the package sometimes.
Very cool. We're going to move on from pitchers, get to a couple mailbag questions before we sign off. We had one from Kevin. Kevin writes that he is a travel registered nurse, and we get him through a 2.5-hour weekly commute across the state of Michigan. That's awesome. Great work, Kevin. Glad we could help make those drives a little bit easier. Kevin wants to know what is your take on Jazz Chisholm's future outlook? I'm in a 12-team dynasty keeper league. Would it be out of line to think I could get one of these guys straight up for Jazz? He's got Bobby Miller, Tanner Bybee, Dylan Lesko, Gavin Williams, Gavin Stone, Tyler Soderstrom, Nick York, Colt Keith, and Oswald Peraza. I think in a dynasty league, Jazz is probably more valuable than just about everybody on that list. I mean, I think you'd be moving Jazz at a relative low point since he's hurt right now. I still think he's a player you want to have on your team in the long run. I think we've seen enough good underlying skills, even though there's still a lot of swing and miss, to be generally optimistic. And I think the other part of what we've seen from Jazz is Esteban Rivera over at Fangraphs had a nice breakdown of how well he's transitioned into center field. He does look very good out there. I think he plays up the middle. You're not worried about playing time. We're seeing power. We're seeing speed. And even if he's always going to be a higher K rate sort of player, he barrels up enough balls to get away with it, and he draws enough walks to not be a liability in OBP and fall in the order, even though the OBP has run a tad low through his first 1,000 big league plate appearances.
Yeah, at 25, I think you can still play the Frankenstein game and be pretty excited about how you could come out with this. I mean, right now he's showing his best chase rate of his career. If he puts together the best chase rate of his career with the best barrel rate of his career, I mean, you could have a really special season. He's the only guy on that list that I think is capable of an MVP type season. And so I'm going to keep this around a little while longer, at least to sell high versus low. The other thing that is funny to me, though, is I did have a trade in one of my leagues that made me super angry, where last year Jazz was traded for some prospects that I didn't think were quite up to the value of Jazz, and it made me for a second want to quit the league, and I was pretty angry. And some part of it is jealousy, like, oh, I kind of wish I had offered two lesser prospects for Jazz and had Jazz right now. Part of it is we just didn't see eye to eye about Jazz's future, and that other owner thought, this is a guy who struggled to keep a 300 OBP that just had a 325 OBP for one season. I'm selling high on this guy, And I think that's fascinating because it's his viewpoint on it could be right, and I could be wrong. I mean, we now have 4 seasons of Major League data, and only one of them is really comfortably clear of 300 OBP. But I don't know. The athleticism is superb, and you're just hoping that a little bit of learned experience in games. And you can see some of that in the chase rate, just as that learned experience goes hand in glove with his athleticism, that there really could be a special season in here.
I think you could probably justify trading Jazz in a situation like the one Kevin described in his email if you were playing for this season, so you couldn't really wait for him to get healthy. He's close to coming back, though. You take Jazz and you get back a young pitcher that makes you better. Bobby Miller looks legit. Bobby Miller looks like he's a top 40 pitcher.
An Altuve or something back too,
right?
I want like an old guy.
Yep. Give me an old player that I trust to fill in that spot that doesn't have a lot of long-term value but has plenty of short-term value, because then at least I'm covering the Jazz spot in a way where I'm like happy with what I'm getting from the hitter in that place, and then I've got that extra thing that I need that could be a good long-term keeper. That'd be the only way I'd really think about trying to move Jazz Chisholm in a trade.
Yeah, because we don't recommend usually trading for pitching, but in this case, if you were like Jazz for Altuve and Bobby Miller, is that crazy? I don't think that's crazy. Jazz is the youngest guy, the most upside. The other guy could be thinking, I'm trading a pitcher for a hitter, like a long-term hitter. Maybe you'd have to throw something into that to make it work, but
you probably got to balance it out a little bit with the second player going back. But that's the framework I'd be thinking about if I were going to make a deal like that. John wanted to know, is it time to trade away Luis Robert? He's playing well, and it might be time to get ahead of the next IL stint. I think with Luis Robert, it's similar to the problems we've seen for Jazz, but better overall results. A little over 1,000 career plate appearances now. Lowish OBP at 329, but not problematic. Good batting average. So if you're in a typical league that uses average, a 283 career hitter is great. And we're seeing enough barrels. We're still seeing pretty erratic O-swing percentages. That's just part of who he is. Part of the good includes that process. So that's not going to change. I'm wondering with Luis Robert where the stolen bases are at right now.
Yeah,
2 for 3 in stolen bases in 58 games. Like, that's the missing part of his game this year.
That's where my eye went. And he is this is his second slowest season in terms of times to first. It's he seems to be slowing down a little bit compared to when he first got into the league. However, his sprint speed is 82nd percentile still, so he's not slowed up all the way. It must be an idea of, I want to stay on the field, and stolen bases are just another way I can get hurt. However, if the stolen bases aren't there, and I don't think the plus OBP is going to be there most seasons, you are talking about a guy who's a little bit too uncomfortably profiling like a 260, 30 homer hitter with 5 stolen bases.
What's strange to me about Luis Robert is that he shows clear, like, high-end raw power. That's never been a question, right? Mm-hmm. And we have the barrel rate, and that's been there every year. That's good. It's like he has a mysteriously low hard hit rate right now, 33% hard hit rate overall.
Like, when he hits it hard, it's only in the air.
It's only in the air, which I mean, that's not a bad thing. It's more just a strange thing. So he's a really complicated player to figure out because
like his strikeout rate has been very different in different years, but
right,
his whiff rate has always been bad.
Yeah, so it's like, do you just average everything out and say the answer's in the middle, that the career numbers, the 24% K rate and the 5% walk rate, those are the plate skills he probably has?
A 280 average with a 330 OBP.
Right, and that kind of gives me more of like an Adolis Garcia result. Defense is going to keep him in the game every day so long as he's healthy. Like there's no playing time concern.
He's 25. I'm not sure I'm selling.
Right, the 25-year-old version of a guy that we had a hard time believing in because he did it at 28. It's like, well, okay, this actually can make some sense. Adolis Garcia, after 1,300 plate appearances in the big leagues, has actually started to make better swing decisions too. He's down to a 31.2% O swing this year.
Yeah, and Robert's O swing is the best of his career. I kind of think, Robert is a guy that I do want for the next 3 years, and then I'm not sure I want him at 30,
Sure, and he's 25, so like you said, there's plenty of time to get good value here. So I don't really see this as a sell high. I actually see this as an opportunity to get really good production and kind of wait and see what happens with those steals. I don't have a good reason beyond what
it's
suggested.
Either going to be good or great, and that's a good place to be.
Yep. So thanks a lot for that question, John. Last question came from Eric. What are our thoughts on Taylor Ward? Was last year just a flash in the pan?
Back in with Taylor Ward.
Back in on Taylor Ward.
No, he's still doing everything good process-wise, but it's a little bit uncomfortably boring.
Well, okay. So
and he's 29, so he does not have age on his side.
Still hitting the ball hard, not barreling it the way he did last year or the year before that.
Chasing more than he has.
Mickey Moniak's there to take away some of the playing time, potentially. And in a platoon scenario, Moniak would play more if they like him and trust him. The alternatives in Eric's case were, this is a points dynasty situation, Jesus Sanchez, who's actually hitting the ball hard and doing some good things.
Striking out a lot.
Jake Fraley, who looks pretty good overall, and Trevor Larnach. I think Fraley would be the swap for me if I was going to make a move.
One thing that's a problem is that you see missed games on Taylor Ward's game log. Games where he's pinch hitting, and then fully missed games, I think, too. That's not good.
No, that is not.
And then you think about that outfield and you're like, well, Trout and Renfroe most days when they're healthy. And so it does become a kind of Taylor Ward versus Moniak thing.
Man, this is one, though, like the results so far this year look worse than they should be. I'm not talking about X stats. I mean, I'm saying if you covered up, for Taylor Ward, if you cover up the slash line.
And you're looking at a strikeout rate like that and a whiff rate like that and a barrel rate like that.
Yeah, you would expect 260, 335, 470. And no, you're 241, 308, 354. Projections still like him. So are you trusting the projections with Taylor Ward? The only difference for me with Fraley is that Fraley steals some bases. I think that's where you get a little extra. I think they're actually kind of similar in terms of lower.
And I love Jesus Sanchez's batted ball stats.
Is it finally happening for Jesus Sanchez? We've asked that question half a dozen times over the life of the podcast. And for what it's worth,
he's kept his strikeout rate under 30% 2 years now. Like we're going on 420 plate appearances now where it's under 30%. So he might be at 26 to 27%. Like Jesus Sanchez in a dynasty situation, you're getting 4 years back. I don't know. Sanchez is maybe the way I'm going.
To me, it's Sanchez if you're playing the long game. It's Fraley if you're playing the immediate, who helps me the most right now game.
Yeah. And in either case, Ward is maybe third place. Or second place to whatever your needs are. In like an AL only, I would love to trade for Taylor Ward right now, I think.
Yeah, and if he pops up in a 15-team league waiver wire.
Sanchez available as an alternative, so...
Sanchez is really interesting right now. He's missed time with an injury, so it's only 97 plate appearances this year, but these are similar skills to last year with a few improvements sprinkled in there as well. And if this is everything is clicking, that gives the Marlins a pretty dangerous bat, at least on the big side of a platoon. Maybe they won't play much against lefties because they don't have to, but maybe it finally is happening.
I just said this in a bad way about Robert, but Robert was expected to be kind of a 30-30 guy, but like I see Sanchez as a guy who can hit 260 with 30 homers and 5 stolen bases.
That will work, and underlying tools have always been there. So this is the time to get in if you're going to take a chance on Jesus Sanchez. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. Got lots of great stuff lined up. We did it. The internet held up.
The gods of internet.
Yes, I will withhold my praise until after the internet provides a chance to upload the episode for people to listen to. But very encouraging that we didn't have to splice multiple files together. That's way too much behind the scenes. You can find Eno on Twitter at EnoSaris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.